Hello, welcome to my presentation on the decorated flour sacks from World War I. The title of my presentation is From Aid to Embroidery in Ohio, USA. We'll make a round trip, Ohio-Belgium in the years 1914-1918. My name is Annelien van Kempen. I'm a researcher and artist living in the Netherlands. Only once in the colorful history of flour sacks have these reusable textiles been transformed on a national basis into beautifully decorated souvenirs. A good part of the cotton flour sacks was American, sent with flour to Belgium during World War I. The hands that transformed the sacks were those of Belgian women and schoolgirls. In order to understand why thousands of sacks were decorated with needle and thread, paint, lace and tassel, and how they made their way into current public and private collections all over the world, we must first understand the plight of the Belgian people during World War I and the subsequent organization of the International Commission for Relief in Belgium. During World War I, the people of Belgium were near starvation and sought help from neutral countries, in particular the United States. Before we start our trip, I'd like to give you its program with a timetable through the years. In August-September 1914, we'll talk about the acute shortage of food in occupied Belgium, the appeal for the aid for the Belgians. We'll talk about Madame Lalla van der Velde and her Madame van der Velde Fund. In October 1914, we'll meet in London the Commission for Relief in Belgium. In Brussels, the Comité National de Secours et d'Alimentation and their protecting ministers. From November 1914 till March 1915, we'll meet American Charity for Belgian Relief, their leading women, situation in Ohio, and the why of the cotton sacks. From 1915 till 1916, we'll talk about the charity in Belgium and the American sacks, les sacs américains, of de Amerikaanse bloemzakken. And then, in our times, 2021, we'll meet the flour sack collections in Sunbury, Ohio, a replica of Charlotte Pagel's Burr. We'll see the flour sack collections in Urbana, donated by Mr. and Mrs. Brent Whitlock. And I will conclude with some sack travels and information. Let's start this presentation. In August 1914, neutral Belgium was invaded and occupied by forces of the German Empire. The country was almost completely overrun by German troops before the winter of the same year, as the Allied forces of Belgium, France and Great Britain withdrew westwards. The Belgian government went into exile, while King Albert I and the Belgian army continued to fight on a section of the Western Front. The German occupation coincided with the widespread economic collapse in Belgium, with shortages and widespread unemployment. As a highly industrialized, modern and wealthy country, Belgium was used to import most of its food from other countries. But because of the German occupation, all borders were closed and the German army requisitioned the existing stocks of food. The British Navy blocked all Belgian harbours with floating mines and refused any imports into the German-controlled areas. The situation was so critical that organised help on a large scale was necessary. The shortage of bread was particularly acute. Everyone, the poor and rich alike, depended on the imports of grain, wheat and wheat flour especially. It makes me happy to know that there was a woman who came to the rescue of the Belgian people with conviction, and that woman was Lalla van der Velde Speyer. She was born in Camberwell, Great Britain, on the 4th of April 1870. She is one of the many women who work determinedly towards her goal, care for destitute Belgian compatriots. Lalla came to Brussels as a 16-year-old teenager to continue her education and would live in Belgium until the war broke out in August 1914 and the German occupier forced her to leave her new homeland. Lalla was 44 years old and in the prime of her life. Her name, Madame van der Velde, came from the Belgian Minister of State, Emile van der Velde, who was her husband. Lalla's work experience for the socialist movement, her women's suffrage activities, and her completely autonomous nature led to immediate decisive action in the crisis situation of the first week of the war. On the spot, the plan arose to travel to America to ask for help from the women there. On September 1st, 1914, she sent a telegram to New York calling on American women to come to the aid of the Belgian people. She traveled to New York, where the Belgian Women's Dollar Fund was founded the day her appeal was published in the New York Times. It received its first subscriptions before noon of the same day. Lalla van der Velde traveled to America via London together with La Mission Belge aux États-Unis, the Belgian mission of 4 ministers who had been ordered by King Albert to explain the Belgian position on the condemnable and brutal invasion of the Germans to US President Wilson. And one of these ministers was Lalla's husband, Emile van der Velde. Upon arrival in New York, on the ocean liner Critic, journalists and photographers of all New York newspapers called on Madame van der Velde, and her publicity tour had started. We Belgians look to you Americans to help us rebuild our country. The Madame van der Velde Fund would emerge during Lalla's impressive 6-month tour in the US and Canada. She was welcomed with open arms and enthusiasm. She traveled, I will indicate it to you, from New York to Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto. She gave speeches in Buffalo, Syracuse, Chicago, St. Paul, Minneapolis. She continued her trip to Pittsburgh, gave speeches also in Philadelphia, went through New York to Boston, back to New York, and on to Washington and Baltimore. And here are the newspaper articles which talked about her speeches. And when she went back in April 1915, she succeeded to bring $300,000 for Belgium. Now, a conversion of Belgian of dollars and francs from 1914-1915 in today's money is a complex affair. My conversion of amounts is a rough estimate, just meant to give you an idea. $1 in 1914 is worth in today's money approximately $26, which means that Lalle van der Velde has collected in today's money $7.8 million. France helped Lalle van der Velde to send food aid to Belgium, flour packed in cotton sacks, which could be used to make clothes after washing and bleaching. Millers in Buffalo made sure that her own name, Madame van der Velde Fund, was printed on a carload of flour sacks. Flour sacks and newspaper articles that testified today to the determination of a wartime woman. The relief efforts for Belgium were established in the British capital of London and the Belgian capital of Brussels. The Comité National de Secours et d'Alimentation, the CNSA, with headquarters in Brussels, was headed by two Belgians, Mr. Ernest Solvay and the banker Monsieur Émile Franqui. The CNSA worked in conjunction with the International Commission for Relief in Belgium, the CRB, with headquarters in London, and the commission was formed with Mr. Herbert Hoover as chairman. The commission was a private organization, operated mostly by volunteers, under the supervision of Herbert Hoover, the man who would later become the 31st President of the United States. Diplomatic protection of neutral countries to the CNSA was provided by Mr. Brent Whitlock, American Minister to Belgium, together with his colleagues, the Spanish and Dutch ministers to Belgium. Here are some moving images of the food relief for Belgium, taken in the port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands in 1915. There is no sound or music, I will not comment, and let you enjoy this short movie. These were the ship movements until July 1917. 484 ocean liners sailed from overseas to the harbour of Rotterdam in the neutral country, the Netherlands. The Netherlands is the neighbouring country to Belgium. More than 1,000 cargo ships crossed the channel from Great Britain to Rotterdam. and over 7,000 inland vessels transported cargo from the harbour of Rotterdam into Belgium, and Rotterdam played a critical role in this enormous undertaking. All food and other relief goods were received in Rotterdam and transported to Belgium. The CRB brought the relief goods into Belgium and northern France. The CNSA organized the movement of goods to the 9 Belgian provinces, distributed the goods and made sure Germany observed its agreements with the protecting ministers. On their turn, the German army made inspections on the barges with relief goods that entered Belgium. The flour distribution to the Belgian bakeries started with the barge mooring in the harbour. The sacks of flour were loaded on wagons and transported to the bakery. The bakers brought the freshly baked breads to the soup kitchens for distribution to the destitute, or sold the bread in their bakery shops, where crowds of people would wait for the shops to open, and store windows were decorated with empty flour bags. The total value of the gigantic package of food aid that reached occupied Belgium and northern France between the years 1914 and 1919 amounted to $800 million, equaling an import of 5 million tons of relief supplies. Almost 3.5 million tons of that relief consisted of cereal grains and flour. The financing of food aid was a complex affair. The official CRB reports show a payment system which consisted of loans, debt settlements, warranties and subsidies between the Belgian state and the allied countries of Great Britain and France, joined by the US in April 1917. Now, you may ask, how come? What about the charity, the donations and the gifts? Well, in money, it amounted to only a small percentage of 3 or 4%. And this quote puts the donations into perspective. The Commission has not, as too widely believed, obtained all of the money it needed for food and clothing sent into Belgium and northern France by charitable donation from the United States, nor even from the United States plus the rest of the world. The total private charity of the world put into the hands of the Commission as money or direct donations of food and clothing has amounted to but $30 million, of which 10 million have come from the United States. The motivation behind my research of the decorated flour sacks from World War I is therefore to pay tribute to the tireless efforts of women in particular. The efforts of the hundreds of thousands of people around the world who worked on Belgian relief has not been and cannot be expressed in money. The memories of the contribution they made have been preserved thanks to the decorated flour sacks. Although men were appointed to most official and remembered committees, women carried out the work. The existing and well-managed American women's organizations started working centrally and locally. The women's section of the Commission for Relief in Belgium was funded in January 1915, and Mrs. Josephine White Bates became its chairwoman. Mrs. Lou Henry Hoover, married to Herbert Hoover, took many initiatives, both in London, Great Britain, and California. The Ohio Women's Auxiliary was headed by Mrs. Estelle Godfrey Thompson, née Clark. She was married to William Oxley Thompson, the president of the Ohio State University in Columbus. Unfortunately, I have no photograph of her, but through my research I have found that Estelle Clark Thompson descended from a well-to-do Cleveland family. She worked as a teacher of dramatics at Weston College for Women in Oxford, Ohio. At the age of 32, she married William Thompson, and she played an active role in Ohio women's organizations and campaigned for women's rights. She favored women's suffrage. The author and social activist, Mrs. Charlotte Hoffman Kellogg, was the only female delegate of the CRB. She traveled to Belgium in 1916 to study the Belgian women and published a book about her research in 1917 titled Women of Belgium, Turning Tragedy to Triumph. The appeal for Belgian relief was extensive and urgent. The Belgian Relief Fund, the Miller's Belgian Relief Movement, and the Ohio Commission for Relief of War Sufferers, they all communicated through letters, calls and advertisements in the newspapers, and orally at regular meetings of clubs, churches and schools. And in newspapers I have found several articles. If you desire to contribute to the Belgian Relief Fund, remember that wheat can be left at any of the mills in Highland County and money at any of the Hillsborough banks. The Delaware churches will devote a short part of their time at Public Service Sunday to the consideration of the Belgian Relief Fund. Members of Women's Council to secure money and supplies in Akron. Grenville Dennison Coeds deny themselves meat and contributed $75 toward $230 fund raised on campus for Belgian war sufferers. At the meeting of the Women's Club Tuesday afternoon, by a unanimous vote of the members present, it was decided to have no refreshments at their next social function, but to donate a barrel of flour to the Belgian Relief Fund. On Monday morning, a letter was sent to the teachers of all the schools in Knox County with a request that it be read and each pupil asked to make some contribution to the fund, if only a penny. The relief efforts were successful throughout Ohio. Dozens of mills contributed barrels of flour. Citizens collected hundreds of sacks of flour. From north to south, from east to west, cities and villages contributed to Belgian relief. The fundraising campaigns resulted in carloads of relief goods transported by rail from Ohio to Philadelphia and from Ohio to New York Harbor. The Miller's Belgian Relief Movement contracted the steamer South Point, which sailed from Philadelphia on January 26, 1915, on her journey to Rotterdam, with a cargo of 275,000 sacks of flour. The CRB New York office contracted the British steamship Nanook, a state ship of Ohio. On March 27, 1915, SS Nanook departed from New York with the relief supplies on board and arrived in Rotterdam around April 20, 1915. The relief supplies were transferred to barges for transit to the Belgian villages and towns. In March and April 1915, the Belgian bakers were able to bake bread from the flour, and the local population could taste the good gifts that the people of the state of Ohio had donated. The Ohio Commission reported to have collected more than $53,000 for Belgian relief. The Millers Belgian Relief Movement received 4,800 barrels of flour donated by Ohio, and the price of one barrel was $5. In money, this equaled $24,000. The flour donations had been purposefully packaged in 49-pound cotton sacks with an eye to reuse the cotton cloth. It was what they called a mutual interest. I give this citation. The weight is convenient for individual handling. The use of cotton will, on the one hand, help the American cotton industry, and, on the other, the Belgian housewives, who will be able to recycle the empty cotton sacks into undergarments and household textiles. Our donations thus providing both food and clothing. The origin of the flour sacks in any current public or private collection can be traced back from the original prints on the sacks. The printing of flour company emblems or trademarks on the sacks were an art in itself and are an important element in the decoration of the sacks. By World War I, photographic reproduction and metal engravings of multiple colors were used for printing the flour sacks. While many of the flour sacks are printed simply with the name and location of the mill, or stamped Belgian relief flour on front or back of the sack, others form a pictorial narrative of rural America. With great relish, the Belgian needlewomen and artists used those original American prints as basic templates for their own artistic decorations of the flour sacks. The cult of transformation in Belgium was started. The flour sacks were coined the American sacks, in French, sac américain, and in Flemish, Amerikaanse bloemzakken. Now, in the next 3 slides, I'll show you a variety of examples of the decorated sacks. Here are some fine examples of decorated flour sacks with name and location of the mill. and other examples of decorated flower sacks with the stamp Belgian Relief Flower, War Relief Donation or ABC Flower. And here some examples of decorated flower sacks with the pictorial narrative of rural America. The Americans' recommendation to reuse the flour sacks was followed, although the actual clothing and textile supply in occupied Belgium through the CNSA was a matter of locally collected, used or superfluous goods and the distribution of shiploads of new and used clothing from the US and Canada. The Belgian women made jackets and undergarments from flour sacks, especially for children. However, they found the flour sack so special that they also sewed playful, smooth dresses for their daughters. The children were photographed and the images went around the world to show how happy and grateful the children were. The Belgian Food Committee, the CNSA, decided to sell the empty flour sacks to Belgian needlewomen and artists. A newspaper citation reads as followed: "The sacks were handed over to young girls who made all manner of very fine objects out of them, a variety of recollections of the war and expressions of gratitude to generous America." Girls' vocational schools made a considerable contribution to the practice of decorating flour sacks. The headmistresses of the École Professionnelle made great efforts to use the recycling of the flour sacks as an educational tool. A next citation from a Belgian newspaper article reads: "For weeks and months on end, the girls had worked on decorating the sacks with embroidery, needlework and sewing, paintings. They designed lines and colors and produced genuine works of art, beautiful and sophisticated, some of them masterpieces even." With some sewing, needlework and embroidery, the simple flour sacks underwent a complete metamorphosis into cushions, tea hats, table runners, wall panels, bags, aprons, etc. Before long, even artists started painting the flour sacks. The Belgian embroiderers and artists expressed themselves in creative additions to the original printing on the sacks. Patriotic patterns and subversive stitches were their favorites. They worked with the colors of the Belgian flag, the red, yellow and black, the red, white and blue of the American flag, and the predominantly red and white of the Canadian flag. They typically also added Belgian patterns like the lion, King Albert and Queen Elizabeth. They also added the years of the war and inscriptions along the lines of "Thank you very much, America." They also embroidered American eagles, wheat stalks, and flags of allied countries. The flour sacks were decorated with charitable intentions. Knowing that the sacks had been sent by overseas benefactors, women from well-to-do circles who constituted a driving force behind the charity committees took bold action. In a bid to help Belgian prisoners in Germany, the women and children of fallen servicemen, or their destitute fellow citizens, in general, they started raising money through sales exhibitions and raffles. As an added benefit, some needlewomen could now also make a living by decorating the flour sacks. The unit price of the decorated flour sacks varied from place to place. In the province of Liège, the flour sacks were sold at 4 francs for a plain one, with original print, to 15 francs for an embroidered one. And in today's money, my estimate is that this was $25 for a plain original flour sack and $78 for an embroidered one. The sales revenue exhibitions and raffles in Liège amounted to more than 5,000 francs, which is in today's money and dollars 30,000. And then at the Cinquantenaire Museum in Brussels, where 300 sacks were put on display, the sacks achieved a price ranging from 20 to 50 francs apiece. In Herstal, in the province of Liège, the committee L'œuvre des prisonniers set up a sales exhibition at the town hall. On January 13, 1916, the Women's Committee welcomed a delegation headed by Mr. Robert Arrowsmith, the CRB delegate for the province of Liège. The president, Madame Jeanne Castado, addressed the delegation in English. In her speech, she said, "We thank you, you who have been so kind and so generous to send us so many bushels of flour. We have had the pleasure to embroider and beautify the empty bags and to employ them a second time as a matter of charity. Be welcome, American benefactors, who have prevented our unhappy little country from starving. We shall be eternally grateful to you." The exhibition raised 2,000 francs, which is more than $10,000 in today's money, for aid for prisoners of war. Let me show you 5 flour sacks originating from milling companies in Ohio. The first one is a jacket made from a flour sack, Belgian relief flour, of the Northwestern Elevator and Mill Company in Toledo. This one is an embroidery from a Belgian relief flour sack of the National Milling Company in Toledo with the years 1914-1915. This next one is an embroidered flour sack square deal from the Gwyn Milling Company in Columbus. This one is an embroidered flower sack, Belgian relief flower from the Moody and Thompson Milling Company in Peninsula. The Belgian embroiderer decorated the cloth with patriotic designs and her expressions of gratefulness, hearty thanks from Belgians. The fifth flower sack is an embroidery of the famous white loaf roller flower from the Sunbury Milling Company, Burr and Sons. The embroiderer added 2 American flags as an expression of her thanks to the US. Speaking about this Sunbury flower sack, my research revealed more copies. Gottlieb Jacob Burr owned Sunbury Mills since 1875. It was a family business. Sunbury Mills has been the longest operating mill in Sunbury. An original Sunbury flower sack is preserved in the collection of the Art and History Museum in Brussels, Belgium. An embroidered copy is in a private collection in Great Britain. When I did research in the In Flanders Field Museum in Ypres, Belgium, I discovered that one of the panels of a beautiful room divider has been made of a Sunbury flower sack. As the panel has been very professionally embroidered, I like to show you the details of this embroidery. Here are the details of the flower sack Sunbury, painted and embroidered. A so-called embroidered replica of a Sunbury flower sack is proudly preserved in Sunbury's community library. The embroiderer of this replica is Charlotte Grace Pagels, born in 1895, who married the youngest Burr son, Gordon Jacob Burr. Gordon Burr was a war veteran. He served in World War I as a captain in the US Army Infantry. Charlotte and Gordon Burr have lived in Pleasant Ridge near Cincinnati. Charlotte became acquainted with the collection of decorated flower sacks from World War I on a visit to the Hoover Tower at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. This was probably in the year 1966. The Hoover Institution archives keep the archives of the Commission for Relief in Belgium and usually exhibit some of the hundreds of flower sacks in their collection. Charlotte was surprised to see an embroidered flower sack from Sunbury. It inspired her to embroider exactly such a flower sack. Back home in Ohio, she looked for a flower sack printed with the White Loaf brand at Sunbury Mills and got to work. This resulted in the embroidered replica, which can be seen in the community library. An interesting collection of World War I decorated flower sacks is preserved in the Champaign County Historical Society Museum in Urbana, Ohio. This collection has been a donation of Mr. Brent Whitlock, American minister in Belgium, and his wife, Mrs. Nell Brainerd Whitlock. The couple received the decorated flower sacks as gifts for their efforts to aid the war-stricken people in Belgium. The Brand Whitlock collection consists of at least 7 decorated flower sacks. And most of these flower sacks were commissioned and decorated to order. I'll show you 3 pieces which were embroidered in honor of Mr. Brand Whitlock. If you are interested to know more about the history of the Commission for Relief in Belgium and the decorated flower sacks from World War I have the following recommendations. Visit the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library Museum in West Branch, Iowa, with a collection of at least 450 flower sacks. Visit the Hoover Institution archives at Stanford University. Their collection has more than 160 flower sacks. You could read the books written by author Jeffrey B. Miller about the history of the Commission for Relief in Belgium. His most recent publication is Yanks Behind the Lines. For the embroiderers, embroider the patterns of the Belgian embroiderers and follow the descriptions given in the book Out of War, A Legacy of Art. It is available in the gift shop Herbert Hoover Presidential Library Museum and also online with them. And may I invite you to visit my website and read my blogs at mailzak.annelienvankempen.nl. We have returned from our round trip Ohio-Belgium in the years 1914-1918. It has been a pleasure to guide you on our flower sack travels. If you have any questions about the decorated flower sacks from World War I, please email me through the contact form on my website or through the Big Walnut History email address. I'll be happy to answer your questions. And thank you very much for your attention.